Hello, everybody. We're once again expecting severe weather across the United States today with a focus on our mid-Atlantic region. This is going to pose a threat for mostly wind and hail, but maybe a couple of tornadoes also. The date is May 30th, 2025, and let's get right into the forecast. Today, the Storm Prediction Center has highlighted an enhanced risk over the Carolinas, which is mostly driven by wind and hail, but we do have a larger slight risk extending most of the mid-Atlantic from Georgia all the way up to Virginia and the Chesapeake region. Additionally, we have two marginals. We have one across where Illinois and Wisconsin meets Lake Michigan, and then we have one in our western Texas to eastern New Mexico area that we've seen the past couple of days. To start, we have a large 2% tornado risk across the East Coast, which is primarily going to be caused by a line of storms. And then we have a more isolated 5%, which is also going to be caused by that same line of storms, but there is an area of increased vorticity/shear here, bolstering that risk. Looking at our wind outlook today, this is going to be the primary risk for severe weather. We have our two small 5% in our marginals, and then we have our 30% area around the mid-Atlantic in our main risk area. This is going to be the main cause for severe weather today and is actually fueling our enhanced risk. And this is also going to be caused by that line of storms. For our hail, once again, we have two 5% in our marginal areas. And then we have a larger 15% in our main risk area, which is going to be fueled by that line of storms as well. Looking at our day 2 risk, we can kind of see a downtrend in severe weather. For the first time in a while, we're only having marginal risk at most. And here we can see this is from our trough causing our severe weather today. As always in Florida, we have some thunderstorms expected. And then lastly, we have one marginal centered over Oklahoma, and that is going to be caused by air meeting our downward swooping trough. For our day 3 outlook, we continue to see a calmer weather pattern with only marginals at most. We have one marginal in Texas, and then we have one marginal up in our Montana, Wyoming, Idaho region caused by another trough digging in up here. However, the Storm Prediction Center is expecting weather to ramp back up. As we can see, they have highlighted a 15% day 4 risk, and they've also highlighted a 15% day 5 risk. Both of these are going to be caused by a large trough digging in over the western United States. Looking at our live satellite in today's risk area, we notice that there is a broken layer of clouds around our main risk area, but we do notice that there's some clearing in front of the cold front and low, and that is going to allow the air mass to destabilize later for later convection. Looking at our long-range guidance models, we can see how today's severe weather threat is expected to evolve today. We have that large trough deepen down over the northeastern United States. We see our cold front, and we see a line of storms today. We'll talk about more how our storm mode is going to be more linear than discrete today in a minute. Then after this sort of moves off into the Atlantic. And then going into Saturday, we get a break most of the day. But Saturday night, we could see some storms around Oklahoma, mainly caused by air meeting our trough right here. And as we push forward into Monday and the rest of Sunday, we do get a little break. But Monday afternoon, we're expecting storms from a remnant tropical system down here in the Texas, Oklahoma area. And we're expecting storms up here in the northern United States or the Dakotas. And then Tuesday, June 3rd, looks like it could be a larger day with a big line of storms initiating Monday night up here across the northern plains. Moving forward into the daylight hours, we actually see storms initiate rather early along what's assumed to be a boundary caused by a low right here. And this trough is expected to bring severe weather to the United States all the way up until June 7th. And then what we notice after that, we see a large trough up here in Canada, and that's going to cause even more severe weather on the 8th, bringing it to our Midwest region. And then as I go forward into the far future, we notice that there's another trough. So it looks like our June could be fairly active in terms of severe weather, probably more active than normal as we get this pattern of just reoccurring troughs over the United States. Looking at our upper air maps today, as we move towards the afternoon, we see that jet streak really deepen and develop, and it ejects really quickly out to here. That's going to cause quite a bit of forcing and sort of foster that more linear mode. Up here in our left front quadrant, there's going to be more lifting. That's why our tornado risk is more associated with that area. And then as we push forward, we'll see a jet dig in to that Wisconsin, Illinois, Lake Michigan area. That's going to cause entirely wind storms later and maybe some hail. And then one other thing we notice, we get sort of a weird little shortwave dip back here near the Colorado, Oklahoma, Wyoming, Nebraska border. And that's going to be cause for thunderstorms later. And then one last thing from our upper air maps, that large trough that we've been talking about for the past couple of days, we can actually see there's a bit of downtrending. So the European model does not think it's going to be as strong as we originally thought it was, or be as across the United States as it was. It's going to be mostly up north. So that's definitely good news. Taking a look at our simulated reflectivity later, we can see our low pressure system marching eastward right here. And then as we go into the afternoon, we can see that sort of line of storms develop with a partially discrete nature in the beginning, but as we can see in our tornado risk area, it tightens up into a line rather quickly. From the looks of it, it looks like it's going to be a mostly wind and small hail threat, with the possibility of KOCS tornadoes with the shear we have out there today. Here's a closer look at our southeast sector. We can see storms across Florida this afternoon, and then we see that line associated with our boundary push through South Carolina also around the evening, and then we see scattered storms all the way from Louisiana to the Atlantic. Here's a closer look at our Lake Michigan risk area later today. As we can see, we are expecting pretty much an entirely wind threat to move through in the afternoon to evening hours, probably going through Chicago in the evening. And this is associated with our trough up here meeting our air down here. Lastly, looking at our marginal risk in the southwest to western Texas area, we can see that the HRRR initiates storms around where our two air masses clash and a possible heating boundary. And we can see that the HRRR is pretty confident that there actually won't be really any storms in Texas, but mostly eastern New Mexico. And these are expected to be fairly weak and dissipate pretty quickly. Taking a look at our convective models from our main risk area, we can notice that our CAPE maximizes around the afternoon today, and we can see areas of up to 2,000 to 2,500 CAPE in this area, with it mostly around 1,500 CAPE. That is definitely enough for storms to fire, but it is definitely in that not very high, but also not very low range. Another thing we notice are our shear vectors are going to be fairly perpendicular to our boundary. So these storms could have a discrete nature, but it is unlikely based on our model guidance and the amount of forcing that there will be today. Taking a peek at our significant tornado parameter, this is a conglomerate of a bunch of convective models, which gives us a broad look at how conducive the environment is today. We do see pockets of 4s and 3s in our risk area around mid-afternoon to late afternoon. This is definitely when the tornado risk will maximize across our area. helicity or spin in the area. There definitely will be some spin with pockets of over 100. Over 100 is kind of that base of what's considered good for tornadoes. So there definitely is some spin out here today. And then lastly, looking at our dew points, there definitely is enough moisture for storms to sustain and initiate out here today. Mostly low 60s to high 60s. And then one last thing, let's take a peek at our temperature. We can see that cold front move across the region today, right in here. It's a relatively weak cold front, so there won't be as much forcing from the cold front, but rather it will be more from our upper air dynamics. What we actually notice as this system pushes off is that we actually get a really big cool down in our eastern region. So we can see 50s to 40s up here in the northeast to Great Lakes region. And then in the rest of the southeast, we can see 60s, which is below average for this time of year by a decent margin. So that's great news for everybody out here. The last thing we're going to look at convective wise today is our hodograph in our main tornado risk area. What we can notice is that we do have a decent amount of low level shear with some curves in the lower levels, and then it sort of straightens out as we go up into the upper levels with pretty strong shear. In our summary down here, we see good helicity almost reaching around 200 in that 180 range. We see good low level shear around 30, and then we see good bulk level shear over 40 to help sustain storms. We also notice good amounts of cape, almost no capping. And then as we look at our skew T chart, we see decent lapse rates decreasing 7 Celsius every kilometer. We see a good dew point temperature spread. We do see a pretty saturated environment though, with our first bit of drier air up here near 500 millibars. So what that means is that the air is actually going to be more stable in a way, and that's not as conducive for lift of storms. So that's one of the hindering factors today. Then the last thing we're going to look at before we look at our climate analysis, we do see some veering in the lower levels, not loads though, and then our precipitable water is 1.6 inches. So that does leave the potential for strong downdrafts. For our climate analysis, here is our excessive rainfall outlook, which gives us a pretty good idea of what areas would be most at threat for floods today. We do see a slight risk of excessive rainfall from New Jersey all the way down to eastern Kentucky. Looking at our 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, which is valid from June 4th to the 8th, we are expecting to see a warm up in the east, which would be associated with a ridge in front of that trough that we've been talking about for a while. And then that trough in the west is going to bring below average temperatures or near normal temperatures to almost the entire western United States, except a little bit of western Nevada, northern California, and southern Oregon. And then last but not least, here's our 6 to 10 day precipitation outlook, also valid from June 4th to the 8th. We're expecting above normal precipitation in front of that trough with all of those, with all the weather we're expected to get from it, with near normal precipitation on our eastern coast. And then our only little area of below average is in that same area of above average temperatures that we saw in the last graphic in western Nevada, northern California, and southern Oregon.